So I'm always on the lookout for cool app ideas, for some cool apps to build. And the other day I was browsing one of my favorite sites called Hacker News. There's some interesting articles, some interesting apps that people are building. And I stumbled upon this post here, okay, that says Show HN, which means Show Hacker News, Boring Report, a news app that uses AI to desensationalize the news. Okay, in today's world, catchy headlines and articles often distract readers from facts and relevant information. And so the way this app works is it displays different news headlines, but it removes all the sensationalism and the clickbaity and all the controversy from the headline, just to give you the facts, just to tell you what exactly is happening. So as an example, let's say we're browsing kind of the home section and we click here. So this guy is to join Chelsea next season. So if you click this, you see the news article here, like a part of the article. And if you click on this link, you can go to the original article, right? This is the original headline, okay? This guy plans Frank Lampard talks amid uncertainty over interim Chelsea boss. Okay, so this headline has some extra, information, some extra sensationalism, if you will, right? But if you look at this one, very, very simple, very neutral. And that's kind of the idea for this app, right? There are different categories, different things. And what's interesting about this app, it got, like almost like 1,200 points, which is a lot, right? That is a lot, right? To get on the front page, you need at least like, a couple of points. Anything over 100 is pretty good. But anything over 1,000 is like, it's a runaway hit, right? So this app got me interested. And I thought to myself, how easy it is or how difficult is it to build a similar app using no-code tools? And so that's exactly what I did. I went out and I built a similar app to this one, and it works great. And now I want to show you the app, and then later I'm going to show you how exactly I built it, because being able to build these kinds of apps, I think, are going to be very, very useful. And these kinds of apps are in demand, right? Because if you look at this very, very simple app, has over 1,000 points, which is insane. It rarely happens. Rarely you have apps that get over 1,000 points on Hacker News, which is a very, very popular kind of tech site, tech news site. Stuff like that. So let me show you the app first. Now, as always, all the resources that I mentioned in today's video, whether these are Flutterflow apps or third-party integration flows, are going to be available when you join our amazing Patreon community, and you can learn more about it by visiting a link in the description below the video. So we're going to come here, we're going to create a new test environment, and I'm going to show you the app running inside of Flutterflow, which is one of my favorite no-code builder. You can build pretty much any kind of app you can think of using Flutter. All right, so the app is loading. All right, so here's the app, and right now it's displaying recent news headlines that were loaded about an hour ago. Okay, so here's the home page, right? We're seeing different headlines. Okay, so for instance, Turkey votes in an important election. So if you click on this, you can see the title that was modified by the app to make it more neutral, remove all the sensationalism, remove all the clickbait and things like that, any kind of bias. And then you have the kind of an excerpt that's also modified by the app. Okay, this thing was also modified by the app. Okay. And so if we go into my database, I can show you the original title and the original content. So if we go back here, I actually store the newly modified as well as the old titles. And so here's the content, just to give you an idea. This is the original title here. Turkey votes in pivotal elections that could end Erdogan's 20-year rule. And this is the modified title. Turkey votes in important election. That's it. Okay, and that's exactly what it does. We have the original content here, and then we have the modified content, and then we have all the articles here. So if you go back to the app, we can go back here and we can read the other headlines here, right? Suns part ways with coach Monty Williams after 4 seasons, right? Very, very neutral, very, no bias. Lori Vallow Daybell found guilty of murder and other crimes, use financial news. And the other thing that you can do is you can actually browse by categories, just like in the original app. So you can click on crime, you can look at crime headlines, you can click on finance, finance headlines, horoscope. You can look at horoscope. You can go into politics if you want, read politics, finance, etc., etc. World news, sports, etc., etc. Then you can clear and go back and see all the articles, right? You can click on this one, see the excerpt, things like that. And it's all going to be very, very neutral, no sensationalism, just the facts. Now, with this proof of concept here, I'm only using 10 articles just to show you how the app works. You can easily modify it to display, 50 articles or 100 articles or how many articles that you want. And I'm going to show you exactly how you can do that when we get back into Flutterflow, and I'm going to show you how the app is built. Now let's talk about how you would build such an app. So what you're looking at is a very, very simple high-level diagram of how you can build this specific app as well as apps like that. So the most important thing you guys need to understand is that if you are using something like Flutterflow or another no-code app builder, you can't do the processing, the titles, the content, all the processing, right? When you're removing the sensationalism and removing the clickbait stuff, you can't do it inside the app. You have to do that beforehand. And so what we have here is we have to load the content. This is where we load the titles and the actual articles, the body of the article. And then we're processing them using AI. In this case, we're processing them using GPT. And then we're saving the new content. And only then we are actually loading them inside of our app. So only then will we actually load them and display them to the user. This is the only part that's actually done using the app, using the no-code builder. And so how exactly is this part done? Well, this part needs to be done using another tool. You need to do that before. You need to do that before you display the data, because that data needs to be ready when the user is actually viewing the data on your app. And so for the purpose of actually loading this initial data and processing it, how we want to do it, I actually chose a tool called make.com. And in make.com, you can create interesting scenarios that do all kinds of interesting things. And so right now you're looking at a scenario that essentially gets the data of the news articles, changes them to make them more neutral, and then saves them to a database. So right here, we're making an HTTP request to an API that gives me current news articles. And in this case, I'm using a third-party API called News API. They have a generous free plan. You can get started right now. And if you log in, get your API key, you're going to be on a page that looks something like this. And here, you can search for news articles, get curated breaking news, headlines, etc., etc. This is a very, very easy library to use. You can simply use maybe everything or top headlines. It's really up to you. And the result, you're going to have this JSON response that essentially gives you the titles and the headlines. And that is exactly what I'm doing here. I have this thing here. I'm sending in an HTTP request that gets this data from the News API. And the next thing I'm doing is I'm using something called an iterator. And the job of the iterator is to cycle over each item in our request, because this request gives us a response of, like, let's say 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 different news articles. And we need to cycle through each one because we need to modify each one. So this is an iterator. And so what it's doing is it takes that whole thing and it executes everything beyond it for each of these specific items. And so the next thing we have is we have a text parser. And the purpose of this text parser is to remove any new lines or line breaks or stuff like that. We need to kind of parse it. And what I'm doing here is I'm using a simple regular expression. This is R is a carriage return, and \n is a new line. And this means just match them, more than once if there are more of them. And the new line is just blank. I'm just leaving it as blank. And so the end result is that we remove any and all new lines. And once we have the text without all the new lines, we are issuing an HTTP request to GPT. And you can learn more about the OpenAI GPT, ChatGPT API by heading to platform.openai.com, and you can read more about it here in the API references, right? You can click on completions and you can use this create completion API, which is exactly what I'm using right here in this flow. And once we have the response back, we parse the response and then we simply save it in our Google Cloud Firestore. Okay, and this is my database here. I have a collection of articles, and then I have a collection of documents that were saved. And I'm also saving the original as well as the new title and as well as the content, the original content and the new content. Now, in the actual GPT prompt, which is how you specify to, change the text and kind of modify it, in addition to actually removing all the extra stuff, all the controversy, and all the sensationalism, I'm also asking it to categorize it. And that way I can show categories on the app. Okay, and the prompt looks something like this. This is what the prompt looks like. Okay, this is my prompt here, and I'm also asking it to categorize. When replying, also categorize the new story using the field category, and then I'm also capitalizing the first letter of all the values. And this is the response right here. It gives me a title, gives me content, and it gives me a category, right? So, and categories are important because I can then show different categories, and I can also let user filter by different categories. And so once we have this data in our Firestore DB, at that point, we can actually have the app load all of this data and show it to the user in the UI. And now let's jump into our Flutterflow no-code builder, and I can show you exactly how I built an app that essentially loads the data from here and displays it to the user. So here's our app. It's a very, very simple app. We only have two pages here. We have a list view and we have a detail view. And the first thing I want to show you is I want to show you our database setup, which is our Firestore. So if you click here, we just have articles, right? And this is our collection. And in the collection for each document, we're going to have the title, the content, and the category. They're all strings. I have this configured, and you can click here and you can simply configure it by clicking here, going to Firebase and entering your project ID. So if you come back over here, this is our articles collection. We also have different documents. And I'm also storing the original and the original, but I'm not really displaying it. Okay, you can display it in the app if you want, but I thought I would save it just to compare it, but I don't really see a reason to display it inside of the app because the original app doesn't really display this data as well. And so once you have your Firestore DB schema set up, the next thing you want to do is you want to build out the app. And that's very, very simple because once we have the data in our Firestore collection, actually displaying this data is very, very trivial. So this first page is a page that displays the different items here. And the only thing I added really is I added a category. And this is also a list view, but in this case, this is a horizontal list view, right? So we have a traditional kind of list view, which is vertical, but then I also added a horizontal list view that has this kind of, it displays these categories in kind of this horizontal format, which I think is really, really cool. But the thing about this specific list view is that we are using a custom function to just pull the categories, right? So I have this custom function. It does a bunch of things. So if you click here, we added this function. So this first statement removes duplicates. And the second statement removes any empty strings. And that is all I'm doing. Then I'm just sorting it and returning it, okay? And the result is I have a really nice list of strings here that's nicely capitalized and easy for the user to kind of click around and filter by a different category. Another thing that you guys need to understand is how the filter works, right? So the first thing I did is if I go to the list view and I click here, I have a page state variable called category. And this is a variable that gets set when the user clicks on a specific category. And the purpose of this variable is to act as a filter. So if I click here, we save a category, right? We have this page state variable. We set it to whatever was clicked here, to whatever the user chose here. And then what we're doing is when we have this list view, we have a filter, right? So we have a backend query, just list the articles, but we also have a filter that sets the category to this specific category page state variable. And that way, when the user is browsing, where they're clicking, right, they are seeing different data show up, right? And they can clear it, and then it displays all the data. And the clearing is actually simple. And when we click on this button, all it's doing is I'm simply resetting the value of this page state variable, and that automatically resets the filter on this list view here. So very, very simple. And the other important thing that we're doing is we have a redirect to a detail view, right? So when the user clicks, for instance, on this container, we are simply doing a navigation. We're doing a navigation to detail, and we are passing the article reference to the detail view. Inside the detail view, we load the data, right? We're passing the article reference, but we need to load the entire article, right? So the first thing what we're doing is we have a backend query that gets the document from reference, and now we have the entire article. Now we can display the title and the content. And so this is a standard pattern here. When you have a list and a detail view, you pass the reference of the document that you're interested in displaying in the detail view. And then the first thing you're doing in the detail view is you pull up the actual document from the reference. And that's pretty much it, right? The actual app is very, very simple, very, very easy, because the bulk of the work is done using this flow. And another nice thing about this flow is that you can schedule it, right? So I can have it scheduled to run daily at 10 a.m. I can just turn on scheduling, and it's automatically gonna run every day, gonna fetch, the new headlines and the content from our news API, run it, update the data, and then when the user refreshes it the next day after 10 a.m., they're gonna see new headlines. And you can change this. You can have it every day. You can have it at regular intervals, so you can update it every hour, every 2 hours, whatever you want. You can do it using days of the week. You can do it days of the month if you want, but that's probably a little too rare, right? That's not a very frequent update. That's a very infrequent update, right? So typically you might want to do every day, or maybe a couple of times a day, maybe every hour if you want. Maybe for your premium customers, you can do it every hour. It's important to mention that you can do a ton of stuff using this so-called integration tool. In this case, I'm using make.com, and I've been using make.com for years. I'm not affiliated with them or anything like that. I just really, really like this tool. And as a result, you can build really nice integration flows. In this case, we are building a pre-processing flow, right? We're pre-processing text, and we're saving into Cloud Firestore so that our app can load it and display the right data. And as a result, we have a cool app. And obviously, there's so many things that you can do with this app. For instance, if you click here, you might want to have a link to the original article, right? That's very, very easy to do. You just add another field in your integration flow, and you're going to have a link to the original article, which is kind of what this specific app does, right? They have a link here, and you can easily, come back here. You can have a little container, and you can have a link as a widget above this title, or you can have a widget below it, or you can do pretty much anything that you want. You can customize it any way you want. And as a reminder, if you do want to customize the app, which is probably something that you want to do, you want to add a little bit of your own touches, some things, maybe change the color, add a little bit of text, add the link to the app. These are all natural improvements to the app. These are all very, very good customizations. And you can easily do it by viewing and or cloning the app when you join our amazing Patreon community. And not only will you get access to the app that I showed you here, I'm also going to give you access to this flow. So you'll be able to import this exact flow I have here into make.com. So you can have the whole flow, the pre-processing, as well as the app. But not only that, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to get access to all the apps that I've done on this channel, plus extra content such as Q&As, live streams, behind the scenes content, as well as my Patreon exclusive masterclass series where I do deep dives when it comes to specific topics that our community are not exactly 100% sure about and need some further clarifications. So if you're serious about your no-code journey, or you're just interested in viewing and or cloning this specific app, maybe you want to launch it to the mass, then you definitely should check out our amazing Patreon community. And you can do so using the link in the description below.